Can we please start now? You're on mute. On mute.
Wonderful. Shall we, you said, shall we get started?
I will introduce you and I will welcome our colleagues who has joined us. Dear colleagues, уважаемые коллеги, если вам удобно слушать на английском языке, вы можете оставаться на основном канале. Если вам необходим будет перевод, вам нужно будет переподключиться на функцию переводчика. Внизу вашего экрана есть значок глобуса, и вы там выбираете русский канал. Наши переводчики, коллеги, они будут переводить вам всю речь, которую профессор будет нам рассказывать. Спасибо. Если какие-то вопросы будут, можете писать в чат. Okay, let's start. Dear colleagues, welcome to this session, Introduction to the Corporate Governance. My name is Perizat and I'm the supervisor of the University of the Future and will be moderating today's session. The speaker of our session is our estimated Professor Alexandr, Putt, Chief Strategy Officer, the Chairman of Corporate Governance and Stewardship of the Astana International Financial Center, the Chairman of the Academic Council of the Astana International Financial Center. Nowadays, the role of the corporate governance is very, very demanding and highly increasing in Kazakhstani companies. And this session is dedicated to introduce you with the role and basic principles of the corporate governance. Before I start, I kindly remind you about the rules of this session. The duration of the session will be 45 minutes, including 10 minutes for your questions and answers. You may ask your questions in our chat box, and at the end of the session, Professor will be able to answer this. Thank you for your attention. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Perizat. I said before, Perizat is the best, and it's true. There's no doubt about it. But Asel is equally the best. And Asel is also on our call here. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited about this. And let's immediately dive into the agenda for today. 4 key items I will be addressing with you. First of all, how do we define corporate governance? Number 2 is we're going to be looking at the evolution of corporate governance since the 1980s and where actually it is emerging into. That's the second item. Then we're going to be looking at the AIFC corporate governance principles. In 2019 and early 2020, we developed our own principles of corporate governance. And I will give you a little bit of background what they are. And maybe you're interested, or the organization where you're working, in adopting them, and then we'll be very happy to engage you in that process. Finally, we at the BCPD, Bureau of Continuous Professional Development, we have signed a partnership with the Charter Governance Institute, and I will be talking to you a little bit about corporate governance training and certification and various pathways to actually chartered governance professional. And of course, there will be time for Q&A. And as Perizat mentioned, please use the chat box in order to relay questions to her. And then afterwards, we'll engage in a dialogue. So let's start with corporate governance and how it developed actually from its early definition in the United Kingdom. The late Sir Cadbury, in 1992, wrote the following definition in the Cadbury Report. And I will read it to you and then also highlight a couple of interesting characteristics that we see here. So what he said is, it's the system by which companies are directed and controlled. Number 2 is the board of directors are responsible for the governance of their companies. So it's not the shareholders, but actually it's the board of directors. The shareholders have, of course, an important role because they appoint the directors, but also the auditors that provide independent audit. And also the shareholders need to satisfy themselves that an appropriate governance structure is in place. Now, hopefully you can see my cursor here. Directed and controlled. So already in 1992, the focus was on controlled, which is compliance, and directed, which basically is performance. So many people think that corporate governance is about compliance only, and that is unfortunately wrong. More on that, how it's developing later on. So it's equally important actually that you focus on the performance, or in other words, the long-term sustainable success of the company. That definition, as mentioned here by the Financial Reporting Council in their latest corporate governance report, 2018, they argue that this remains true. But there are two significant changes. First of all, the rate is changing, and probably the velocity of change is changing as well. And number two is that there is now a broader set of stakeholders beyond just the share. Is that for the first time, they emphasize the importance of pursues objectives that are in the interest of the company. So it's about the long term as opposed to necessarily the short term success. Monitoring is still part of it, and that's again the compliance aspect. But looking at pursuing objectives that are in the interest of the company, that obviously has to do with the performance aspect of the organization. But there is more. 2015, we have the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I want to emphasize two aspects. First of all, fostering long-term investment. Number two is that business increasingly has a role to play in building inclusive societies. And that's what we have here. So it's more than just the company, but also the implications that the company has on society at large. And this, interestingly, coincided with the development in 2015 and 2016, respectively, of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but also with the Paris Agreement on global climate change. So those are two definitions. But also, we need to look at what are the principal tenets of corporate governance. And there are three. Let me start with accountability over here. And the question then is, accountability to whom? Is it accountability to the shareholder, or is it accountability to someone else? Well, actually, it is to someone else. It is actually accountability to the company. Shareholders obviously have shares in the company, but it's accountability to the company and its long-term success. Obviously, when we talk about corporate governance, all of these codes have been developed for large listed public companies. As we will discuss later on, I would also argue that sound corporate governance also applies to any organization of any size. Number two is integrity. It's doing the right thing. So it would be, for example, not acting in its own self-interest, but basically acting in the interest of the organization, and avoid being conflicted. Finally, we have transparency. You may have heard that there's reporting requirements, annual report typically. So this is about disclosure, and of course the fine balance between, on the one hand, confidentiality and transparency. Someone is calling me. 1 second, please. Hello? One second. Sorry, I'm back. It was an important call, but my assistant is actually picking up. So transparency, it's typically through the annual report, and the fine line doesn't need to be crossed between what is confidential and what should be disclosed to all the stakeholders that are interested or have an interest in the company. So a combination of accountability, integrity, and transparency. Let's now look at director duties. So if you look at director duties, there are really two big areas. In the United Kingdom, they have 7 duties. In the US, they only have 2. And in most other countries that I know, they also have 2. So on the left-hand side, we have the fiduciary duty, or what the US is called the duty of loyalty. And loyalty comes on the right-hand side, we have the duty of skill and care. Now, they're very different. For example, duty of loyalty, the fiduciary duty, has to do with the fact that one should not have a personal benefit from decisions made at the board level. So, and also aspects like fraud and so on. So there's a legal aspect around here that should not be ignored. If you look at the duty of skill and care, is it basically that directors use their independent judgment in order to make proper decisions from which the company will benefit. You may have heard of directors' liability insurance. They protect you against selling. And the reason is that fraud cannot be insured, but business judgment, on the other hand, if you have applied your competencies to the best interest of the organization, you can actually insure through directors' liability insurance. And all listed companies actually have that for their organization or for their directors. If you look at this, then the question is, why does anybody want to be a company director? Because the pay is not great, and the duties are actually very important as a director. The essence of corporate governance, very quickly, it's about 2 elements. Number 1 is, it's about the exercise of power by different groups. It used to be primarily a single group, and that was the shareholders or potential future shareholders. But now it's about increasingly a broad group of people. It includes employees, directors, the shareholders, of course, but also other stakeholders, including civil society, including media. Let's not ignore media. Media can have an important interest in the company and can actually affect it positively and negatively. And on the other hand, it's also about disclosure, transparency, accountability, and so on. In essence, it's about the principal tenets that we have just discussed. So it's about power, and it's about the principal tenets of corporate governance. Let's now look at the evolution of corporate governance. And here I'm going to be presenting primarily my work. And it will be published as a book next year, not this year. This year we're working on another book, and I will let you know what that book is all about in about 5 minutes. But if you look at from where it started in 1980s, it really started in the US. And it was driven by defensive-driven governance. So organizations that were potentially underperforming were being targeted by private equity firms with the objective to take over control. And the response was by organizations to implement a number of hostile takeover offenses. Sometimes referred to as ATCAs, anti-takeover charter amendments. Now, obviously, this continues today. You have private equity firms that are continuously looking at companies are underperforming, and if they see opportunities, they will actually go for it. But this is how it largely started, and it started in the United States. Then we saw a number of corporate scandals. The ones that probably everybody knows is Enron, but also WorldCom and Maxwell. Maxwell was actually in the United Kingdom. And then there were two responses. In the US, Sarbanes-Oxley, in the UK, the Cadbury Report. And I refer to this as compliance-driven governance, with the objective to prevent fraudulent failure. In all these cases, fraud was involved. Greed and fraud was involved. And we actually saw that in not only in the US, but also in the UK and most Commonwealth nations, but also in most continental European countries. What happened then was the global financial crisis, 2008. And there we saw again a reactive response to corporate governance, especially focused on financial institutions. And in the US, that was driven by Dodd-Frank, and in the UK, it was the Walker Report. But increasingly, the focus became very clear that it was on conformance and performance. So both Dodd-Frank and the Walker Report argued for the creation of a separate committee that would look at risk. Traditionally, risk is part of the audit committee, but the audit is typically not really forward-looking. It's really looking at here and now and also the past. So a separate risk committee that is forward-looking, the objective would be to try to anticipate future discontinuities and the impact it could actually have on the company. And most financial institutions actually now have, and not just financial institutions, but large multinationals now have a separate risk committee. More on that in a few minutes. But what we also saw, starting in 2016, and I already referred to it when we looked at the definition of the OECD and the G20, the 2015 definition that is, that there's increasingly a focus on the sustainable long-term success of the company. If you will look at global climate change, currently the cost of global climate change is $16 trillion, and it's growing at about 700 billion a year. In other words, it would be the second largest economy, just behind the United States, if it would be a country. And it will overtake the United States by 2030, unless we do something about it. And what we see that increasingly countries are emphasizing in their codes of corporate governance the focus on sustainability, not just on financial performance, but also on sustainability performance. So there's clearly a trend away from pure compliance to performance and also sustainability-driven governance. Let's now have a look at, looking at my watch as well. I will speed up a little bit. The AIFC corporate governance principles. So two aspects are most institutions develop codes. But what's the problem with codes? That they're typically designed for large listed companies. So we said, let's develop principles, because these principles can be used for any company of any size. And obviously, we wanted to develop principles that would be useful for the AIFC and its various constituents. Number two is that we also wanted to look at applicability, where we would initially apply it. And we said we would apply it to the AIFC authority, but also its 100% owned subsidiaries. Number two is apply and explain. And the apply and explain actually is a novel idea that actually comes from the South Africa King 4 code, but also used in the weights report in the United Kingdom for large private companies. But what we would do is that companies would look at the provisions, decide to opt in or not, and once they've opted in, it's not about complying, it's about applying and explain. So they apply the principles, and then they explain how the principles have been applied. And they would do that in their annual report. We developed 13 principles, and we put them under 7 sections. And in addition, we also have a section on director duties. I'm not going to say anything more on the director duties because we discussed that previously. The 13 principles are grouped under 7 sections. So they have to do with company purpose and board leadership. That's about the mission, the values of the organization. The important division between executive management and NEDs, non-executive directors. And here the logic is that the non-executive directors should have noses in, but fingers out. Why is that? They need to understand what's going on in the organization, but they should not be involved in running the business. That's the role of executive management. Board structure, composition, and skills. Why do we look at that? Because, well, we have Gen Z now that is entering the work environment, and they want to be listened to. They also are the first digital age generation. In other words, they grew up with technology from the day they were born. And they could, for certain companies, provide a different perspective than their older colleagues could. It's not, of course, about age only, it's also about gender, ethnicity, and in general, about the right composition and skills in order to make proper judgment and decisions. Audit risk, internal control, and reporting, that's one of the traditional areas for any board. Therefore, we had to include it, and of course, it has an important section among our principles. And then we have risk governance. And it's not just about managing disruptive risks like, for example,
работы, такими как глобальное изменение климата, на которые я уже ссылался. Мы говорим о рисках кибербезопасности тоже, и на данный момент мы живем сейчас в эпоху кризиса.
Далее у нас есть оценка совета директоров и индивидуальная эффективность.
Are our board members individually and collectively really discharging their duties? In other words, they contribute to the long-term success of the company. And then, of course, directors need to be compensated. That's also the executive directors, but also those that actually could in the future become executive directors in the organization. They need to be identified and they need to be properly compensated for the contributions they make to their company. We also ensured that the principles are aligned with the AIFC mission. And the mission is directly linked to the sustainable development of the country, that is Kazakhstan, of course. And under there, we have 47 guidance provisions. And we're now working with various boards within the AIFC in order to apply the 47 guidance provisions. The last thing, training. So now we're going to be talking about opportunities for you with reference for training. We have signed a partnership agreement with the Chartered Governance Institute in the United Kingdom. It is a qualifying membership body. What does that mean? That it has received a royal charter. And a royal charter, for those who have studied in the UK, know that both universities and professional bodies need to have a royal charter, otherwise they cannot provide a charter designation. That's number one. Number two is that the Chartered Governance Institute is the oldest continuous existing institute that focuses actually on corporate governance. It was created in 1881, and its original name was the Institute for Chartered Secretaries and Administrators. Later on, it received its charter, by the way, around the turn of the century, 1902, and the name was changed in 2019 to its current name, which is the Chartered Governance Institute. And the reason is that they wanted to cater not just for company secretaries, which are still very important constituents of them, but also governance professionals in general. So we thought that this would be the best fit for us. Also, the elements of affordability that are very important to consider for emerging markets like Kazakhstan. As part of their qualifying program, there are two parts. The first part is affiliate membership. And that one has 4 modules, call it 4 exams. Each require about 200 hours of study and is at the level of advanced undergraduate. We'll be starting training on corporate governance in August of this year. Company compliance administration, international interpreting financial and accounting information, and company law will be offered starting from next year. Then the second part is leading to graduate membership. Again, it's 200 hours per module, and there are 3 modules here. And that's at the level of a master degree. We will be offering in September risk management as a module through the BCPD. And we have the development of strategy and board dynamics, which again, we're going to offer the year afterwards. So in total, 7 modules. And if you have the right level of experience, this is what we have here, number 4, a minimum of 8 years of experience, and you've passed all the exams. That basically means that you can call yourself, and you see my own qualification here, you can call yourself a chartered governance professional. You can also call yourself a chartered secretary, and you will also be a designated fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute. And it's the equivalent of a master degree, and it's also recognized as such by the business community. There's, of course, a pathway towards that, but also there are ways to actually leapfrog or accelerate that development. But before we look at how to accelerate the development, a very quick overview about what a module would typically look at. It would be an intensive 5-day classroom module. We will probably do it over Zoom this year, given the pandemic. It would have a morning and an afternoon, typically about 8 hours per day. There would be a study break of about 4 to 5 weeks. And then just before the exam, 1 week before the exam, there would also be a review session that would actually take an entire day. The exams are organized in late May and in late November. So we're organizing ourselves to make sure that we're ready, that you are ready if you are interested in following corporate governance and any modules of the qualifying program, that you would be ready for the exam in November. But the structure that we have here would also be used for any other training program or any other module that we are doing as part of the qualifying program. The last slide I want to do is basically entry options. So for those who are interested, then the question is, where could you enter? If you don't have a degree, then actually, let's say you could start, but you first have to do the foundation program entry, which is an 8th module, but success in the program foundation entry would actually give you access to the 7 other modules. On the other hand, if you have, very quickly also on this, why is this important? Because in the United Kingdom, there's now an increased emphasis on the apprenticeship model. So in other words, people start working. They may study part-time, let's say for a law degree or a finance or accounting qualification. And in parallel, they also study with the Chartered Governance Institute. We will not be offering the foundation program entry qualification, at least not as it's currently envisioned. If, on the other hand, you have a finance law or MBA degree, well, that's the question mark. If it's yes, then you have exemptions based on your transcripts. So, for example, I have an MBA degree, and based on that, I was eligible for up to 3 exemptions. I decided not to take them, but because I thought it would be a good refresher. But it's based on transcripts. If you have another degree, then no exemptions apply. So it's only for those with finance or a legal or an MBA, which actually has finance, accounting, and strategy included, that you would be given exemptions. We at the AIFC, BCPD, we're really starting with fast track. And fast track is for those who are a qualified lawyer or chartered accountant. And that's what we have here, plus 5 years of experience. And they only have to take 2 modules, so corporate governance and risk management. And that's why we will start with corporate governance in August and risk management in September. If you don't have 5 years of experience, we call it professional entry. You're still exempted from 2 modules, depending on the qualification that you have. So it could be that you're exempted from the accounting module in case you're a chartered accountant. So it really depends on the qualification. And you would also be able to study with us for corporate governance and risk management this year. So that's all I wanted to say. Basically, I tried to provide you with an overview of how we look at corporate governance, how it developed over time, the principles that we have developed within the AIFC and how we're rolling them out, and also the training that we are offering as part of the BCPD at the AIFC. Perizat, how am I doing on time? I think I'm about right, correct?
Yes, Professor, you are perfect in time. Thank you for your presentation. Sorry, I was on a wrong channel. I mean that you are perfect in time. Thank you for your presentation. Dear colleagues, if you have any questions directly to our professor, please use your chat box. In meanwhile, please, Professor, I received the answer with the request to distribute your presentation among our participants. Because we launched the platform, all the presentation and video records of the session will be available on our platform, University of the Future. I think some of the participants might have joined us not via our platform, but because we have sent separate emails to the corporate governance audience, and they are not aware on the using the platform. That's why I will send my email in the chat in order to instruct you for further managing the platform. Please, if you are interested in the education on corporate governance, if you need to have the access to the platform, please can you please send me a direct email. I will answer on all the administrative questions. I think we don't have any other questions. Thank you, Professor.
No questions.
No question.
Not a single one.
No, a single one, but some of the participants were interested in the presentations in order to promote and distribute within the companies, because this presentation is also dedicated to the corporate training of the BCPD that Professor has already mentioned will start on hopefully on August and September. We will be working on it, and you also may access me, contact me in order to provide you with more detailed information on the opportunities to study at the BCPD, because this trend, I believe, will be very demanding within our corporate companies, within our audience. Do you have any questions, colleagues? Oh, I do have one question. Okay, this question also regarding the recording of this session, and yes, again, it will be placed on the platform. Can you please send me email in order to have the access to the platform? I will instruct you. Since I'm a Chief Learning Officer, I would like to show. This is question or just argument?
I think it's the same attendee who wants to use the recording,
yeah,
and wants to show the recording. That's fine.
I cannot see the name of the participant. What are the prices for education? At this moment, they are not established, but as soon as we establish all the pricing in the program, it will be distributed also from the PCPD channels, from all our channels we have. And also just to let you know that we are working on the finalizing our brochure with very detailed information on the programs, with program itself, and it will also be distributed. Please also, again, please contact me. If you, in order not to miss this channel, I will send you all the information directly, because we keep all the contacts who are interested in the education. That's why I want to send the recording to the emails. Unfortunately, the recording will not be distributing within emails, because as one of the steps to get used to this platform, we ask our potential colleagues, potential participants who will be working and studying at the BCPD to use this platform, because this is our trend, new trend. We are digitalizing. We have all our trainings on the platform, and all available materials will be placed there. Thank you, and sorry.
Very quickly, if I may, on pricing, and indeed, as my colleague Perizat has mentioned, the pricing has not been fully established, but just to give you kind of a ballpark figure. So it's really a ballpark figure. So could be plus or minus 10, 15, 20%. But if you would, and let me go back to this this chart over here. Where is it? The very final one. If you would be starting from afresh, so you don't have a eligible degree, so you will have no exemptions. You have to take 7 modules. We're talking about including the fees to the Chartered Governance Institute and the training that we would provide. And it would take you about 2.5 years to go through all the modules. It would cost you about 5 to maximum 6,000 pounds sterling, all inclusive. If I don't think you can currently get a master degree in corporate governance for that price from a top-tier institution. I don't think it exists anywhere in the world. If, on the other hand, you would be over here with only 2 modules, and again, that would include the cost to the Chartered Governance Institute, but also the cost to the BCPD or the University of the Future, we're talking about half that price, about 2,000 to 2,500 pounds sterling. So it is definitely something that is affordable even in Kazakhstan. And we're working actually on not only accessibility, but also affordability. And as Perizat has mentioned, we're using that digital platform for experts. And I'm a professor at IE Business School, and emails are actually not used anymore. All the communication is actually happening through a digital platform. We have our own platform, but there are many platforms that exist. Canvas is one example, but there are many others that exist as well. And that allows actually the community to communicate with each other as well around maps the course. Perizat, please, back to you.
Thank you, Professor. And the last question I have seen in the chat box: the education wouldn't allow to proceed with the working process. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, the program which we have already established is 5 days, and 2 days will be held during the weekend. And it's a full day, and you will need 3 working days in order to participate in the training.
There's another question here, and that is, if I'm a lawyer with 5 years of experience and a master degree, I need to take 2 modules, but with exemptions. Am I correct? Well, it depends. The Charter Governance Institute, and they're currently looking into it because the system in Kazakhstan is somewhat different. You need to be registered to Law Bar Association for 5 years, in addition to your law degree. Your master degree doesn't count here. It's an LLB degree, or its equivalent, that you need to have, plus 5 years of being associated with the Bar Association. We know that's not ideal for some legal people that especially work in the field of corporate governance, but for practicing lawyers, you would typically be associated with the local bar, and therefore, if you have 5 years of experience and a law degree, you would be eligible to only take 2 modules. But as I said, we have appealed to that with the Charter Governance Institute, and we're looking actually for a good outcome, but obviously that rests entirely with them. So if you don't have 5 years experience, in that case, however, you need to take 5 exams. And you will receive exemptions for 2 of them. That would obviously include company law. And the other one will depend on your transcript, but you would only have to take 5 as opposed to 7. And that's again over here. So if you are a qualified lawyer or a chartered accountant with less than 5 years of experience, you're exempt from 2 modules.
Thank you, Professor, for your answer. This is basically the issue that we were trying to resolve, but unfortunately, the Chartered Governance Institute has a very strict condition, and that's good. Actually, we need to comply with all the rules of the international institutions. But for future, I mean that for the future plans, if you are a young specialist, it's better to already register on the Bar Association in order to have plans to proceed with the certification in future. That's our advice for us, and or year by year pass these 5 exams in order to get full certification. Okay, thank you, colleagues. I believe there are no more questions. Thank you for your active participation. As I already said, I will send, if you send me for sure all the direct contact, I will send the official announcement on the program when we are ready, and you will for sure get it. Thank you, Professor, for your time. I know that you are very busy, and thank you for participation at our event. So we are...
Perizat, thank you. It was a real pleasure and masterfully moderated as always. So it's always a pleasure to work with Perizat. And if any questions that are important for me, Perizat will make sure that I'm aware of them. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon, evening.
Thank you, you too. Спасибо, коллеги. Хорошего дня.